fascinating to be in Chicago. A dozen years after an NDE, Chicago played an important role in why I'm here. 12 years ago today, I was a month out from an NDE with brain damage and heart damage, without the capacity to be standing here in front of you. So something's happened along the way that I feel has been extraordinary. Science said it shouldn't have happened. Now science is coming around and saying, you know, the brain's kind of plastic. It does change. And luckily, I didn't listen too long. And for her hospitality and wine and dining here the last couple of days, she's very. Is Diane still here?
She's out in bed.
Oh, tell her to go to bed. She's not been doing well physically, so I'd love to have her take it easy. The NDE I had, I guess I'll tell you the aftermath first. So I woke up in my bed with this beatific smile and wonderful just feeling of unity. And watched this fireman come marching through my bedroom. And I wondered why in the heck a fireman would be coming through my bedroom, all full of regalia, with boots and coats and packs. And I used to be a fireman when I was in college. It was one of the jobs I had. And I thought, you know, those things are really heavy and hot to be hauling around, and then I fell asleep again. And then woke up to several other firemen poking and prodding at me. And wondering what the heck they were doing in there. I turned to my wife and said, what's going on here? And she said, just humor them, my dear. And I got carted off to the hospital wondering what the heck was happening. And midway to the hospital, I started feeling my tongue swelling and feeling like it was filling my mouth. And I recognized for the first time that something happened. From that period on for the next 4 months, I was sent through a battery of tests, neurologically, cardiologically. I could not sit up without having chest pains, left arm pains, like a very characteristic heart attack. I couldn't go up a set of stairs. My memory was trashed. Difficulty processing information. Multitasking was very, very difficult. And after about 4 months of testing, the doctor said, well, what we're assuming happened is that a piece from a prosthetic aortic valve you have implanted in you came off, and as it went through your brain, it created so much stimulus it cascaded into chaos and a grand mal seizure. I was essentially dead for about 20 minutes with the death rattle, still breathing, did not need resuscitation. But at that time, there was no treatment for damaged brain. It's just what you had. And so I was put on long-term disability and told essentially this is what you've got. So I want to bring Chicago into this story. I don't know how long it was after that, but I lived as a disabled person. To be in a room with this much energy in it, and I say energy because it was as if I was picking up everybody's thoughts, was just too much, and it would just catalyze these little deja vu feelings and out-of-body experiences. And so my life became very quiet. I couldn't drive, couldn't work, and I lived as a disabled person, ironically, leaving a job that counseled disabled people. It was a year to 2 years later. My life was pretty small and narrow in focus and ability. And I got a call from Lee Carroll, if anybody knows him, and his organization. He is a channeler of Cryon, if anybody knows that. And he had done written a book called Indigo Children. And consciousness is something that I had studied a lot and had looked at actual evolution of consciousness and done some research around that. And they called me up and asked me to talk at a conference, one in LA and the other in Chicago. And there was no way I could do something like that. It was impossible. And so I said politely, politely said, thank you, but no, thanks for thinking of me. And then a day or two later, I sat back into my funk and my little small world as I knew it. And I thought, am I going to live safely in this little box that I've created the rest of my life? Or if I was to do what I really wanted to do, what would it be? And that's a key question I've asked my clients. And for the first phase of any kind of crisis, all we want is our life back. But as people get used to that that's never going to happen, they start increasing in willingness to entertain other thoughts and other directions. And one of the questions I'd ask is, what are you wanting? And if they answered it in one sentence, I knew they would succeed. And it had nothing to do with the problems they were dealing with, or the resources that could be brought to bear. And so I asked myself that question, what do I really want, if I could? Well, it's caught within the framework of, well, what I really want is to teach and express what I know. But I can't. I mean, have you ever been caught in that scenario? Yeah, I want to do that, but I can't. It's obvious, and I can show it to you. I can prove it. And I thought, you know, if I really wanted to do something, why don't I just commit to it and do it? I've got 6 months before these lectures. I can find a way to get through an hour-and-a-half lecture. And so I called him back up and said, you know what, I'll do it. And I dove in and worked on the computer as long as I could each day. And I put together a lecture that consisted of 30-second components per page, so that if I got disrupted, or somebody asked a question, or I got distracted, or if a thought came in, I would just go blank. And the fear of that would, you know, obviously prevent me from wanting to be in front of people. And so I had this wonderful lecture that broke it down into 30-second increments, every page for 30 seconds. So if I lost my way, I could just kind of go to the next page, and it wouldn't disrupt the flow of the talk too much for the audience. And then I put this PowerPoint presentation together, because now I had a visual thing that I could use as a skein to keep me in line. Well, what was fascinating was two things. One is about 4 months into the preparation of this, I noticed my mental capacity is improving, my memory improving, my ability to multiple task abilities improving. The other thing that really stood out, I spoke to a very small group in Chicago, and it was more of an informal gathering, but in LA, when I went to LA, I had my PowerPoint presentation all ready to go, except I couldn't get out of the computer. I'd worked for several months, and at that time, I could create a program in my computer that I couldn't break apart and get it on disk. And so I went down there without my PowerPoint presentation. And the morning of my lecture, I very carefully set out my, half-an-inch thick document full of my speech, and went down to breakfast, came back from breakfast, and it was gone. And I carefully placed it right in the middle of the bed so that I couldn't lose it, and it had disappeared. So I stood up in front of this group, essentially naked. I had no structure around me. And today is a little reminiscent of that. Actually, this did show up at the last moment. But we had a real process getting this PowerPoint together, and I was just laughing. And I'm okay with it. What I heard this morning over breakfast, Dan and Neil and who else was there? We're talking, and the comment came up a couple times. All we need to do is show up. And that's been the lesson that I've had over and over, is showing up, look at what is focus in on your intent and take action. There's no need outside of our abilities to take action. We have no limitations when we focus on our abilities. This was brought to my attention by my clients over the years. About 20 years ago, I was working with injured workers, and if people didn't get back to work within a year or so, they rarely ever did. They just got stuck on the system. They called that disability conviction. And I was working with one man who'd been on the system for about 8 years. And his problem was, he said, look, Jim, I've got this bad back. When you guys fix this back, I'll go back to work. But the context he came from is my work means I'm a laborer. And obviously I can't do that. And one day, just by happenstance, I had him, just to get him active, I got him a volunteer position in a sheltered workshop. It's a workshop for adults who can't work competitively because of physical or mental handicaps. And they can work, though, productively under supervision. And I had him volunteer as a supervisor in this, just to get him going. And a week later, just 1 week later, he came bounding back into my office and said, Jim, I'm not so bad after all. You should see those guys. A little bit reminiscent of Neil saying, I've got earwax, and you went through what? And it was out of that I thought, this is very powerful. Change the context, we change reality. And I started seeking out people with the worst kinds of problems I could imagine. And the worst ones I could think of are death or a catastrophic injury that incapacitated us. And as I started interviewing these people, I found a very, very clear pattern among them. And it's one that I want to communicate. I'm not trying to divert from the NDE here. I'm trying to show that we all have crises of one sort or another. Not all of us have NDEs, and that's an experience like if you've never had sex, you can read all about it but still not get it. An NDE is something that hangs out there somewhere, and is it real, is it not? But we've all been through crisis. I've interviewed scores of people at this point, and it is clear that the patterns you find in NDE experiencers is that of people who've gone through trauma and have transformed through the trauma. And what happens, I give you a couple of stories here. One is a woman that I've used when I'm stuck. She was a hospital administrator at the University of Washington, well on her way up the corporate ladder. Her goal was to be the youngest vice president of a hospital in the country, and she was well on her way. And was felled by Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, if you know that. It's always fatal, there's no treatment. It progressively deteriorates the neuromuscular system, and you finally die. And she fought that violently for a couple of years, and deteriorated. Rolled into her doctor's office one day in a wheelchair as a quadriplegic. And the doctor looked at her and said, you know, there is no more treatment. There's nothing else we can do. You're going to die. You may have 6 months, a year to live. And like this body of people that I talked to, one of the first things that happened was that she let go. And what she let go of was life as she knew it. And what she let go to was, well, I'm dying, and I get that. That's what's true. I'm dying. And every day she could feel her body weaken, day by day by day, just like she said it was like a bathtub with a slow leak in it. I could just watch my life energy draining away. And with that acceptance, and that's number one, as people let go, with that acceptance, they step into a vacuum of, I'm not that anymore. My life is disappearing, or disappeared. Who am I? What is true? And that is one of the states that people, humans, resist at all costs, is not knowing. We will hang on to anything, even if, you know, look at a marriage that is highly abusive. People hang on because it's at least something. People hang on to the tatters of a terminal illness because it's at least something. They'll hang on to the hope of a doctor to say, this will fix me. It's at least something. Well, she let it all go. And what she found was, here I am. I'm alive today. What do I want to do before I die? Well, that's a very different question than what do I need to do to get healthy so I can get back to life and the world that I knew. And she didn't have any roadmap for that. It was a blank slate in front of her. What do I want to do? And one thing that I found in interviewing all these people is that some little nuggling inside prompts them to say, well, today this is what I want to do. Well, what do I need to do to get fixed requires my circumstances to change. What do I want to do requires me to be clear about that and then take action towards it. For her, it was, well, what's life about anyway? What are we doing in these bodies? I want to explore those larger questions while I'm alive. She had a wheelchair, she had eyeballs, she could still talk, and she set off to explore that question. Now, the context changed, just like that man that I talked about in the sheltered workshop. The context for her changed from one of, I'm dying from ALS, to, I'm exploring truth. Cool. It changed from, I'm totally disabled, which any doctor would attest to I am whole. Look what I can do. This is what I want. Here's an action I can take. It's ability-based. It's in the moment. And out of that, she started doing a variety of things. One that stood out to me was she'd roll up to a mirror naked and look at this, what she called a bowl of Jell-O with eyeballs, staring back at her. She'd always hated her body. She had polio when she was a child, and has a brace, and walked crooked, and, you know, and was using the academic and professional worlds to be okay, you know, to have some identity, positive identity. And so here she is confronting just herself as she was. And she says, I just choose to start seeing love. Let me see love in this kinky red hair that I've always hated. Let me see love here. It was a choice of imparting meaning to her world. And she said, you know, after about 3 weeks of this practice, of just by rote saying this, I rolled up to the mirror one day and said, wow, you've got pretty hair. That the emotions and the other denser aspects of ourselves, I guess I could say, began to follow suit. What led was her intention, and action aligned with that intention. Well, I talked to her 1988. She had reversed it a few years earlier than that, and that's how I had heard about her. And then I called her up a couple weeks ago, or a couple months ago now, and she totally reversed ALS. She has done research at the University of Washington on ALS and what are the patterns of longevity, which attitude, action is primary. She's done the circuit, written articles. I had lost track of her at about, well, at the turn of the century, about 2000. She disappeared from the radar. And when I recontacted her, I asked her why. And this is something that's critical, and I don't know that we can actually get it across today, but I want to try it in a couple different ways. She said, you know, the medical profession didn't get it. They tried to use my example and what I did as a therapy for healing ALS. Okay, a treatment plan. Do the right attitude, do the right mantras, pray to the right God, do whatever gyrations we do the right yoga, we'll get there. But notice what happened was she let go of getting there and arrived at, this is true right now. This is what I want. This is my power in this moment. Here's actions I want to take. The actual healing was right there. Her quality of life catapulted beyond anything that she had ever imagined. One of the side effects of that, and I have to just say it's a side effect, was that she forgot to die. And she would attest to that. And she quit the writing and teaching and lecturing 2000, she said, because people didn't get it, particularly the medical community. They wanted to make a treatment plan out of this. They didn't get that wholeness, healing is a state of being and not a state of doing. I can regale you with dozens of stories like that. I think one of the pieces that I'd like to thread in here and into the PowerPoint, the reason I made that, is that these people open to a state of being that we can't capture cognitively, we can't capture in our 3D world. And they open to a state of being that encompasses both life and death. They're part of a larger whole. Cool. And I'm alive right now. What do I want to do? And part of that aliveness will lead me to the death process. Cool. I talked to a physicist who had MS and was, again, given a death sentence. Again, he made a very similar shift that she did. And I befriended him. He was supposed to be dead within a year. And he lived about 15, 16 years beyond that. And actually reversed part of it. Became a healer, got a PhD in immunology, another master's in nutrition. I mean, this guy was brilliant. He had a degree by the time he was 18, he had his bachelor's degree. 17 patents to his name. He was on the top of the ladder, what we call success. And so I described that ladder to him while he was sitting in his kitchen, in his wheelchair, unable to have sex, unable to get up to pee, unable to do a lot of the functions we just take for granted as we're trying to struggle through life. And I asked him, what was that? MS to you, what is it to you? Look at it, destroyed a career. He had a contract with NASA, he had his own company, building things that he invented. I mean, he had it all. And he lost it. And when I asked him that question, he looked me right in the eyes and said, that was the best goddamn thing that ever happened to me. And in probing that, what happened again was that the perception of who he was and his interface with the world transformed. He had to create a new relationship through his world, or go down with the ship. And in that recreation of a new way of interfacing and being in a relationship, the quality of his life catapulted. And he didn't die on schedule. The power of the NDE and of these experiences is something that if we really listen to, we will be able to extract ways of repositioning the human community and health systems to better support people. That's a different subject that is my passion, but it's beyond the scope of this particular talk. What I want to do is take a glimpse through the lens of the NDE I had and see where we can carve the edge of our reality and how we naturally trespass that edge to higher states of being, all of us. And that we can use the daily events of our life, the little foibles or even the successes, to continually expand the bubble of our awareness to more and more subtle realms. We don't need the NDE. We don't need crisis. As one man with AIDS told me, he said, after he made this shift, he said, you know, I didn't need to do this. I had the wake-up calls, but it took AIDS for me to let go. That was the operative word. It took this to let go. And I could tell in my counseling when people would succeed. And it's when they let go of identifying themselves, past, future, to being present, focusing in on what they're wanting, and taking action out of that. Now, that shift in focus we can incorporate into, if I look at people in academia and the health systems, that we can create an ability-based track that requires a different relationship between the practitioner and the patient than what we've set up here, but would begin to help people use the crises that we're trying to fix as transformative states while we're fixing them. To get to my own ND, because that's what I'm supposed to be talking about today, I guess I'll start from my birth. I was born with a congenital defect in my aortic valve. And it was non-symptomatic until I was a teenager and had enough body mass and not enough blood to go around that I began to notice the symptoms. I couldn't run. I couldn't jog. But I found that underneath an aerobic ceiling I could do anything. And I became a climber. I became a climbing guide. And I've got several climbing records to my name. It's fascinating because I wouldn't be able to run 200 yards.
What's one of your climbing record?
What's that?
What is one of your climbing records?
Oh, ascent of Mount Rainier on one route that it usually takes 6 to 8 hours, and I did it in 2 hours. Actually, no, I'm sorry, I did it in an hour. Another one, I went from Canada to Oregon along the Cascade Crest Trail. There's a trail that goes down the spine of the Cascades all the way to Mexico. And I did, we had 3 weeks after our program before college started, and so we did it in 3 weeks, 25 miles a day. And it's comfortably done in 50 days or so. But that's not what I'm standing here trying to say. It's not about the records. It's about how we present ourselves in the world and the quality that we choose. The woman in the wheelchair will be a great role model for us to see how can you show up and smile and be present and fully engaged in life with all this huge past and these present inabilities. If a person can do that, then maybe we can face the world in a little different way with what we're challenged with. I keep getting sidetracked, sorry. I'm supposed to be telling this story here. When I was 25, I did notice my aerobic capacities started decreasing. The doctor said, no problem, you should be taking elevators anyway. I said, I just did a winter climb on Mount Rainier 2 years ago. And they go, no, elevators are fine. I said, okay, let me get a different doc. And lo and behold, yes, the valve was fusing up. And I had an artificial heart valve put in at age 25. And lo and behold, I could run after that. And I took that valve up Mount Rainier several times. The reason I bring it up is because the NDE, apparently a little blood clot came off that valve, and when it went through my brain, it created so much stimulus that it just went into total chaos. And so I was left with the inability to function as a normal human being. But I was also left with the most incredible experience of my life. Now, this may not be something I can get through. Ongoing symptoms that I yet have. I'm not working right now. I'm not driving. It's difficult to keep a train of thought sometimes. I can talk, and so this is a pathway that I'm following. I feel like, okay, I can hold forth. Listening to someone else lecture kind of creates havoc in my brain. But it's difficult to keep on track sometimes. Another side effect or symptom is emotionality. I feel like I open up to the whole world and all of it, good and bad, the emotional, the pieces that are from a reference point that I know we have the capacity to create such an incredible world together. And look what we've done. But that's what we're doing, and we have to start here. the emotions, you'll just have to bear with me. The actual experience initially was feeling suspended. I had no boundaries, no reference points. Again, one of those chaos stances of not knowing where I was, no reference to time or space. But I felt this presence around me, as if I was in some sort of a soup. But there wasn't any differentiation, and the mind only can deal with differentiation. There was no separation between me and it. There was just a sense of suspension, no color, nothing. And as I began I had a presence in my body, the identity of still being Jim and in a body. I didn't see my body, but I felt that it was still intact and nothing had changed in that respect. And that faded sometimes to just a pure awareness of me and what was happening, and then other times I had to experience in my body. And so questioning of, well, what is this? How can I grasp that my mind just doesn't know what to do with this? What is it? And I found that it slowly started coalescing in front of me as light. And it became one of the classical, I guess, attributes of NDEs is that white light. An incredibly total, loving light. And I just marveled at it for the longest time. Partly for the light and and what it emanated, but partly what was around it or not was around it. The light represented the universe. It is the universe. I knew that. It was essence of everything. And so what surrounded it was nothing, no thing, no time, no space, nothing. And as my mind, we just went in circles trying to grasp that. I mean, it couldn't, no thing. The mind can only deal in comparison. Can only know black from white. If you have just pure black, there is nothing to do anything. The adage of the fish doesn't know it's in the sea until it jumps out of the sea is that sense of difference. We're being crushed by thousands of pounds of pressure of air, and yet we don't feel it unless you took a vacuum pump to your lungs to create contrast. So the light and the non-light created a contrast for me, my mind, to engage this light. And then I found myself starting to draw towards it. And again, like a classical NDE, I felt these chords emanating from my midsection to events in my life. And they would show themselves and then disappear. And as they disappeared, the light would get brighter. And this happened a number of times. And these were events that I couldn't remember afterwards, except that they were very impactful. They really were defining of who Jim was and what reality is to me. And as I let go of each event or each scene, the light became brighter and closer, or I drew closer to it. And I remember one event that really defined who Jim is, the entity, ego of Jim. It was something I'd really sacrificed or suffered for, and it was a real identifying thing about, what makes up me, what's my bottom line reality. And I remember as the scene came clear to me, I reared up, and I was watching myself do this. I reared up in the face of this incredible, loving presence in front of me, saying, I'm not going to let that one go. And thought, Jim, you're crazy. I mean, the light represents everything you would seek, everything you would want to know. And yet, you're so attached to something, you're going to choose it rather than the light. Well, it vaporized on its own, unresolved. It's something I get to keep playing with, I think, in my life. And more scenes came up. Finally, I began to approach the edge of this light. And as I say, there's no words that I can use to describe this light. It's something you're probably used to if you've heard NDEs. It was more real than anything that I've ever experienced. As I began to merge towards the light, I began to feel that it started filling my legs up and my hands, but mostly my legs. And it got into my trunk. And as it started filling my trunk up, the essence of who Jim is, my identity of myself, began to dissolve. And I became more identified with just being light. Now, what the light represented to me would be the collapse of all dimensions. It's infinite. It's the source of everything. So as in my thoughts, my differentiation, my ability to say who I am separate from you, all began to dissolve. And all of this would just turn into pure unity. Pure, undifferentiated beingness, love. I won't say any more I can't say any more than that. I could go on and on and on and never even approach it. I played on the edge of this for what seemed like hours. And I had total volition of moving into the light, feeling myself merge with it, and then pulling back out, and then having a sense of Jim and the solidity of the entity I know as Jim. And then I'd move back in again and back out. And I'd start playing with ideas of like, okay, how far can I go in? And once I did go into the point where I began to really dissolve into just pure beingness. And before I lost the volitional choice to choose as a separate entity from the light, I stopped. Because if I'd gone further, I don't know what would have happened. I would have had no more choice. Jim would have disappeared to make a choice. Whether you believe in NDEs or not, this is a powerful metaphor. And I don't ask you to believe in NDEs, but I will ask you to really listen to this. The infinite aspect of the universe that physics is pointing to can never be accessed because everything dissolves within it. One of the qualities I discovered, though, was that as I began to dissolve into this light, that as Jim dissolved, the capacity to create disappeared. And that when I pulled back and refocused on this world, I saw that we live in an incredible place. It's temporal, it's separate. I can be talking to you as separate individuals. This is the illusion. But it's a very important one, because in unity there is no creation at this level. It is just one. That we have to create the illusion of separation in order to create at the phenomenal level. And as I turned around, I recognized that at some point, I kept playing on this long. I think I'd still be playing on the edge of it now. But all of a sudden, I felt the light draining away from me and becoming more and more solid. And I recognized I was turning around and going to be returning to my body. And from that reference point, I recognized that in 3 weeks, this intensity of an experience is just going to be a tatter of a memory that the human brain can hold. That it was 10 times, 1,000 times more real than this. And yet, this is the bed of creation. This is an incredibly powerful place to be, and blessed place to be creating. The experience had several other components that I don't normally talk about, but one I think I will today, and that is that I found myself inside of the pyramid. And at first I didn't know what it was. I was just in this kind of a darkness, and it just spontaneously arose. And I was looking down into a pit filled with what I called golden Lincoln logs. That I didn't know what it was. And it took years for it to start trickling in of what those really represented to me. And what it represented is, and what it represents is information that I am to be giving. It is my career path here. And as I step forth on it, I'm finding some very fascinating things in my life changing. There was one other element that I'll point out here too, and that is, after I was done with that, I kind of go, so okay, so what? Now what? and I got the prompting, well, turn around. So I turned around and I saw this old ancient staircase leading up behind me. And it was at that point that I recognized I was inside of a pyramid. And I went up to what is called the King's Chamber, and or what we've named the King's Chamber, where we find all the mummies. Although it was clear to me that that's not their original intent. And there was a throne sitting there, a huge, beautiful, ornate throne. And as I started walking towards it, I, again, was very confused. What is all this about? You know, I've just come from this blissful state, now I'm being shown these things. What is it? As I got closer to it, I recognized it's mine. But I stood about knee-high to the thing. I mean, it was this huge thing. And it took what seemed like hours of prompting and encouragement for me to drop my judgments, drop the pain, drop the little Jim who's never really grown up, to step forth and sit in that throne. I bring that up because that's a common refrain I hear from most people, is that the thing that we're afraid of when they really get to it is our own power, our own ability and power to create. We all are creators. We all have the same source. And we capture our world and our reality in our little boxes of information, and then live out of those as if they're reality. I'd like to, well, I don't know if I'll do this. I just had to laugh when we were having problems putting it up, the PowerPoint. Before I do that, is there any questions? I feel very humbled about being up here speaking. There are so many rich stories here, and people have incredible experiences that need to be shared and talked about. Yeah.
When you had it all prepared, you went to bed and left the PowerPoint on the bed, you woke up, and it just wasn't there where you remembered it to be. How did you react, and what do you think about what happened?
I was devastated. I mean, that was my last chord to a memory, being able to work in a linear world that I had very little capability of doing.
Why did it happen?
Why did it happen? Well, first the PowerPoint disappeared. My presumption of why it happened is that Spirit was just saying, Jim, all you have to do is show up. Be present. And at the end of that story is that I came in after the lecture, and as I was packing up to go home, I found it neatly tucked underneath the TV. The maid had come in. I put it right in the middle of the bed so I couldn't lose it. Right. So the maid had come in, and I didn't recognize that change. And she made the bed and tucked it underneath.
Of all places.
Of all places, yeah.
Now, was that an accident, or was that done by Spirit?
You ask a question that we can get all balled up in.
What do you think?
I'll go back to the NDE. The only reality is that infinite light. That's who we are. This is an illusion. This is paper mache. This is two-dimensional compared to who we really are. That's not to belittle this at all. It's just that we created the separation, and the fall, in Christian terms, if you look at original sin, the first definition of sin is separation. We've separated from the essence of who we are, and we've identified ourselves as these bodies. The journey that I see very profoundly in what I've been documenting and researching over the last decade, 2 decades, is that reintegration of egoic self to intimate self. And when you see the patterns of people with NDEs, one of the characteristics you come and see is people that, as they come back, they want to serve. They want to work with others, even if they're crippled. They become whole as they are. Their identity is life itself, rather than this ego trying to make its way and survive. Yeah.
Lastly, assume that we do live in multiple parallel existences. And this is just one of them. There's another one where you picked it up off the bed and it was there. Was there an advantage in this existence that taught you something for having that loss that has benefited you in a way that will improve the future?
Well, let me use that example, the one with the Lou Gehrig's disease, or the 50 other more people that I've interviewed. I couldn't hear this statement for the first half dozen people I interviewed. I thought it was a way they've justified or rationalized their life and made it okay again. But they said, that cancer was a gift. That broken neck was a gift. That AIDS was a gift. And what it did was break up the reality that they knew. And out of that, they transformed. And this is something I was talking to somebody earlier, that is a very difficult thing for us to appreciate. But if anybody knows Bill English, he had a near-death experience. He's the head of IANS in Salt Lake City. Businessman, playboy. I mean, he was, again, very enculturated in this culture, very successful at it. Broke his neck out jeeping. And I talked to him a number of times. The last time was a couple months ago when I was in Salt Lake. And he's a quadriplegic, forever bound to a wheelchair. He's recently gone through hyperbaric treatments to help rehab some of his spine to keep it from degenerating. And the treatments made him blind. I mean, talk about throwing. How much can you take? Well, here's this man, as I get into his living room, glowing, happy, content. And I asked, okay, let me ask again, why? And you've had another assault here. You are more limited than the last time I saw you. And he said, this is my vehicle. This is my body. And this is the brain I have. That's not who I am. His fundamental identity has shifted to a transpersonal state where he knows he is the universe, the play of it all. And that the pathway of his life is a pathway. He's the one that defines the value of it. And the shift that I talked about earlier, with people trying to fix problems, are encased in a particular meaning structure that they're trying to fix. And once I fix it, then I'll be okay. Once I get that $1 million, or once I get retired, or once I get that spouse that finally loves me, then I'll be happy. So we're dependent on our circumstances to be changed or be so in such a pattern that we can then be happy. What these people are discovering profoundly is that exists right here. Yeah.
When you were having your NDE, were the spirits around you, angels, did they have names? Were they biblical, or were they people from your life?
That's a good point. And they would be names only in the way I would frame it. That our minds can only understand within a cognitive framework. And so we interpret experiences through certain frameworks. And what we forget is it's just a framework. And we say that if Jesus is the framework that I use as the interface to God, then if that's the way, and now Jesus is it, Jesus is God, then nothing else can be. But we forget that we create God in our image. That's all we can do, cognitively. We can experience beyond the mind, but the mind is a framework of concepts which are all separate. They're all related to something they're not. They can never embrace the whole. That's why you hear NDEers all the time saying, I can't explain this. I can't tell you what I experienced, but it's more real than this. So we are living out the illusion here in a framework of separation of linear time. One of the sad things that I feel is, and talking to others that have opened to these states, is that we have said reality is this, and therefore I need to control it. I need to safeguard it. But that's a creation of our minds. And if you look at the havoc we've wreaked on the planet, just between religions, for instance, you know where that takes us. Anybody else? Yeah.
I have a question regarding your relationship with nature. You haven't really mentioned this other than the fact that before your NDE, you were in some of the most beautiful places on earth, in my opinion, Mount Rainier and places like that, climbing them very rapidly. But after your NDE, did you feel more, you said you felt a sense of unity with all things. Did you feel more of a, corny term, but communion with nature afterwards, or anything like that?
You know, it comes and goes. It comes and goes. One of the things that, I don't know how much time I've had, but we look at spiritual transformative experiences, and near-death experience, or many people here have talked about these openings to spirit, and say, I know fundamentally that I'm not just this body. I'm not afraid to die. But we're still wrapped up in life as we know it. An example of that, I talked to a guy who had liver cancer that metastasized throughout his body. And his doctor gave him 6 months to live, and he says, I'm not going to accept that. Went to another doctor, and the second doctor said, you've got about 3 weeks. And he got it, like Evie. He got it. I'm dying. I get it. And all of a sudden, life became incredibly precious. And as he let go of the identity of Ken as an individual dying, and allowed that to be, what he saw was a whole new perspective of, I'm part of life. This is so cool. And he wanted to create a foundation for children to help them see this. He set out, and these are very characteristic things that you'll see in people with spiritual transformative experiences. They want to serve, they want to engage the world, because they do see at a higher plane where you and I and the separations between us disappear. And then they did surgery. They said, well, last gap. And he said, look, I might as well go out on the table. Just go in there and see what you can do. If you can't do anything, I'm out the door. I'm okay. Well, they went in and found that the cancer was gone. I talked to him about 6 months after that. He was down swimming where I was trying to rehab myself, and he had this forlorn look on his face. As we started talking, he said, how do I get back there? How do I get there again? And what had happened was life had reinserted itself. His wife has got, the warts came back, and the bills are there. He still wanted to do the foundation. I mean, the yearning to serve and to contribute was still there. But he'd lost that perspective of the overview. And he was back in his humanness again. I've realized more recently that the people that I've interviewed over the last 20 years that had chronic conditions that would not go away, that those people represent not a bubble of opening, but they let go of life as we know it as an ego structure and embody a higher level of being. And these are the people who said, if you could fix this, and Bill English is one of them, if you could fix this, make my eyes see, peel my neck, get me up so I can get back into that Jeep again, and I lost what I've gained through this, I wouldn't do it. I mean, think about that. Evie McDonald, the hospital administrator with ALS, did research at the University of Washington. And that was a question she asked. And she said, I talked to a number of people who were living high quality, loving, fulfilled lives as they were dying, and said they would never take it back. I was climbing on Mount Baker a few years ago when I was still capable of physical activity. I had a second heart surgery, by the way, in 2005 with I've got reoccurring brain and heart stuff again going on. So before that, so early in the decade, talked to a man who was a marine engineer. And right out of high school, he got into marine as a marine engineer. And for 10 years, he would have done it for free. He loved it. It was his passion. Then he got a wife and a family and a mortgage, and it became the paycheck. And again, what I find in these people is that they had the wake-up call that I'm off track, I'm not in my passion, I'm living through life, I'm getting through life. And he was in that state. Life was running him. And then he got leukemia. Not once, but twice. The second time, the doctor said, put your affairs in order, because there's not much we're going to do about this one. And one of the turning points for him was he was in critical care, going through treatment, whatever they were trying to do with him, and the guy in the bed next to him died that night. And again, context change. He saw, wow, look what I've got. Look what he doesn't have. Let me use what I've got. He ended up going back to college with his 19-year-old daughter, both freshmen. And I talked to him. He was one of my kids' high school freshman teacher. After he had gone through, he was a second-year teacher, I think. Midlife change, brand new teacher, starting out a new career. And I asked him, I said, what was that leukemia to you? I mean, look what it did to your life. It destroyed a career, almost ended your life. You're starting all over at a third of the wage, if that. And no one had ever asked him that question, so he was kind of silent for a moment. And finally he said, you know, I wouldn't wish that experience on my worst enemy. It was horrible. But don't ever take it away from me. You know, before you ask that, let me see if this thing works. I've been hesitating. This computer is in use and has been loud. Things like my brain doesn't do well with some near stuff in there. If anybody, I think it's very simple to get going. If you can do it, do it. I've gained a little bit since my first trip up to speak with my PowerPoint presentation. Oh, it's the same password. Okay.
Yeah. You may not think it's possible that an important contributor.
We got it, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Do you think it's possible that an important contributor to physical and mental illness could be the movement in a person's psyche further and further away from that truth which is unity? And if they move further and further away from that, they're becoming more and more materialistic, further away from the truths you're talking about, that might lead to illness. And that illness might be just what's needed to bring them back the other way.
Well, you asked several layered questions there, actually. It's going to be tough to unravel easily. I'll try to give you the simple answers. That, yes, these people pointed back and said, you know, it took that crisis. It took the breakup of my life as I knew it for me to let go. And it's that letting go that's the key. We don't have to have the crisis, and that's what my real work is that it's like one guy with AIDS said, I've had these wake-up calls, but it took AIDS for me to let go. That we can raise that bottom by doing two things. One is showing the possibility of taking action and attaining a result that we didn't think was possible. I mean, we won't do anything that's not possible, right? One man with AIDS told me in the 80s, when it was a death sentence, it's always fatal in the 80s. Everybody would tell him that. And so he was dying, dutifully. Until one man in Ohio or Iowa, someplace, had reversed AIDS and documented it. And as soon as he heard that, he goes, I can do that too. Totally changed his life and started living. And healed it. So the possibility is one piece. The other is the process. How do we go about it? And this is a paradox that is very difficult to unwind, and is why Evie McDonald stopped talking to medical groups in 2000. She went into, well, she got a whole new career. And that is that we tried to do something in order to get somewhere. And if you notice, what really happens in this group is they let go to presence. The only place we exist is right here. And when they let go to a fundamentally different relationship of themselves in the world. And fascinatingly, with that relationship, they don't need to get fixed. There's nothing to fix. And you notice that we don't address that context change at all. So the context in our medical system is that if we get the right key, we'll be able to fix you. We'll get better then. Paradoxically, and something they don't understand in post-traumatic growth research, is that the people who go through the worst crisis have the most transformation. And if we take a different perspective of who we are, what consciousness is, we'll begin to understand those things a little better and create interventions that support people. But part of that ability-based track that we can implement in medicine requires the person to make the choice. It's their life, it's their creation. And what we need to do is put them back in the middle of their creation. We can do that very powerfully. Right now, our medical system takes it away because they're surrounded by people telling them what is wrong and what resources have to be garnered in order to get them somewhere. So we become passive. We have a very passive medical system. Whether we nationalize it or whatever we do with it, it ain't going to fix it. So let me go through this, because this and I think probably one of the reasons I hesitate is I'm not sure what I have in it. I just reviewed it this morning. So we'll see if, uh-oh, maybe we don't have anything. Uh-oh, now I really messed it up. Can you go, I'm wanting to address the context your questions are coming in, because it's the context that is more important than the content of them. And so let me just run through this briefly, if I can, to set up a scenario here. If we look at two dimensions, we have this way and this way, right? If you talk about three dimensions to a two-dimensional person, they won't get it. They don't understand it. It's very abstract. If you create a two-dimensional cube, for instance, to help them show what a cube looks like, all they see is a bunch of lines. It just does not grok, and it can't. So a two-dimensional bug popping out of a two-dimensional field, seeing three dimensions and saying, wow, I can jump over these lines and look what I can do, I can see the hole here, is not able to go back to two dimensions and say, this is what three dimensions looks like. Look at when you were a kid, and your parents talk about falling in love with someone. Say, oh my God, do I have that? Can I do that? What is it? We don't know it until we actually experience it. If we were to go from our three-dimensional world to higher states, the access we do have to those higher states is our presence in the moment. And what we have in the moment is our awareness. The key and the piece that we can teach to people easily is changing our relationship to what we call reality, which is composed of our experiences and our concepts. One, I think it was Jesus who said, unless you be as a small child, you never enter the gates of heaven. Well, a small child has no conceptual framework. They live in the moment. They express what's true in the moment. And as we grow older, we begin to look at certain events and react out of our concepts of them without seeing what's really true. I mean, when I stood up here, looking at this guy, okay, is he going to be worth listening to? Bald-headed guys, yeah, I know a real wise guy, yeah, I'll listen to this guy. Or bald-headed, oh God, he reminds me of my grandfather, beat me up. You know, we overlay all of our past on the present, trying to figure it out. And what is happening with people who open to higher states of being is they create a different relationship to our thoughts and our experiences. We always have the capacity to be aware. As you're listening to me, you're probably not aware of your big toe or what it's doing or not doing. But by bringing that awareness to it, you have the capacity to choose, to move, to not move, to change, not change. It's from awareness that we have the ability to choose. What's happening with people that are going through spiritual transformations is that they are changing their relationship out of 3 dimensions and seeing themselves as more of an eternal presence. Now let's go back to 2 dimensions and see what that might look like. Talk to a 2-dimensional bug about what a shadow is. There isn't any. Talk to a 2-dimensional bug about where light comes from, or where 3 dimensions is. Well, 3 dimensions permeates 2 dimensions. These higher dimensions permeate who we are, where we are. Notice in our language, though, we're talking about getting to heaven, you know, getting a life, getting successful. One of the paradoxes you see is that as people go through near-death experiences, or the body of people that have gone through great trauma who finally let go, their box is gone or severely damaged. And yet they spontaneously open to something, a presence that says, wow, this is who I am. It's right here. The difficulty of this is it requires direct experience and not belief, thought, getting there formula. There's no there where to get. What you can do is be observing your thoughts as I'm talking. You can observe and listen to my voice and know that who you are is that observer. It's a practice of being the observer or the choice maker of our thoughts and our experiences. From choice, we can then choose to form whatever meanings we have around an experience. And it's that process that we can teach to people. Why does one person, as an example, my next door neighbor, we live unfortunately underneath the flight path for a naval base. And when they come over, can't have a conversation. Well, one guy goes out and salutes them. And the next neighbor goes out and cusses at him. Well, it's just pure experience. We enclose all experience and meaning. And when we call that meaning reality, then nothing else can be. We live out of it. It traps us. The profound nature of crisis is that it breaks apart those realities. And we get to be seeing the world newly. And it's out of that process that people will say, wow, look who I am. Look at the incredible miracle of life. And yeah, my body's dying. Cool. let's get into this experience too, because I know I'm not just this body. That's that original sin of us identifying as this thing as our reality. More questions, because I could yam around forever. Yeah.
Well, let's say you got out of the 3-dimensional box and you experience a larger reality. Could then you come back into ordinary life? Is that transition difficult? I mean, you've seen this larger picture. Now the next day you're living in this life, quote unquote. Is that the transition back into ordinary life? Can't that feel like a prison?
Yeah, that's part of the spiritual opening bubble that I talked about, is that it disappears. And it was this high point, and then I've lost it. the paradox here is as people open up to higher levels of being, it's not getting there, it's already here. It's already in us. And they learn to accept whatever is. My body's dying, it's in a wheelchair. I can't make love, and God, isn't life cool? That they learn that they're the choice makers of meaning. They learn that by framing their world through ability and through looking at the quality of experience, that then becomes their reality. And so they begin to see that the lens through which we see reality and understand and interface with reality is our creation. Just your words implies that there's normal reality here, and then you got to go somewhere. Right? And so now I've got to do something to get there. But notice, the examples that have been brought up are people that their realities were disappearing. They were fractured or gone. Those higher states of being are already here. Just like if you're looking at two-dimensional and ask a two-dimensional bug where light comes from. It just is. It doesn't come from anywhere. Everything's lit up. There's no source to it. They can't find it. So they say, well, it's out there somewhere. We say that those higher dimensions or higher states of being are things to get to. And if we need to use a language, it's going to be more of how can we let go of our box and be the witness of it. Now, we can be aware of my talking, your presence, the pressure of the seat. You can expand your awareness to the room. And the next moment, you're going to be back in, fidgety, doing something different, and your mind's taken over. The next moment, you can re-choose. Now, the power of that choice, like Evie, who just very intentionally said, I choose to see the world differently, and stayed with that until the world followed suit. It implies an incredible power we have of creation, not of manipulation, because she didn't need the world to be any different than it was. I applied that in my own life years later. I had a back injury that was chronic. I remember going to work one day, and again, I couldn't do all the things I loved to do, and I was depressed, and it's kind of one of the states of my life. It's the long gray depressions of, God, couldn't life be better? And I remember sinking into this depression on my drive to work. And I thought of Evie, and I said, you know what? If she could change the way she saw her world, and the world, the quality of the world, not that she manipulated it and got better, the quality of the world changed. I said, well, I can do that too. And so I started focusing on what I could do. I could I was driving a car. I was listening to Beethoven on the radio. I could look outside and see the skunk cabbage growing and flowering in March, and just in the new buds. And I thought, 100 years ago, the richest man in the world couldn't do this. And it just, as I focused on what I could do and the miracle of life, just as it presented to me right then, I changed my framework. And within moments, I had one of the highest states of my being. I just opened up to it. Can we stay there? Again, that's the mind thing, isn't it? When I talk to people that have really accepted life just as it unfolds, can be sitting in a wheelchair. They can be dying. They can be incontinent in bed, going, wow, life sure presents some interesting structures, doesn't it? But they're not identified with the content of it. That's the key. Yeah.
I just wanted to know, you talk about light as being reality, and heard other people say that, but what is the experience that people have of darkness being reality? What is the darkness?
It's the experience of light as being reality. And what's the experience of darkness as reality? Well, notice that first, where I started off the story of the near-death experience of opening to the state of just suspended animation. I had no reference points at all. and they coalesced as light, differentiated from dark. It's the only way my mind could understand it. Our minds can only grasp differences. And unity consciousness is not something that we can ever attain, ultimately. Because if we are conscious of being unity conscious, we still have a separate separation. So in the beginning, there was the Word. In the beginning, there was darkness and then light. The differentiation is the phenomenal world. So these experiences have to come through ways that the mind can grasp, that can interface with the mind. Yeah. Or, okay.
If you're not only here, where else are you? Or is it individually dependent? Are some of us everywhere we've ever been or everywhere we've ever thought of? Or are we all part of one, whether we realize it or not?
Well, that was what I was trying to visualize. We are all part of one, is the fundamental reality. We've come from a reality of an individual separation. We have two domains that we can access. One's our experiences, and then our thoughts about our experiences. We have the five senses that tell us about the physical world around us. What's happening is, as some people would call the veils being thinning, that we are accessing more and more transpersonal states. There's still states of separation, there's still states of quality differences, but they transcend time as we know it. The 4D that we live in of 3 dimensions plus time is a state of being. But that is only one aspect of ourselves. That the people who let go of that, they don't deny it, but they let go of identification with this 3D reality. And as they do so, they recognize they are part of the unity. They're part of all those things you talked about. Yeah.
If you think about these two, if you think about this on a continuum where you have the higher state over here and the lowest state over here, where a person is very individualized here and very unified over here. And you had been, at the time of your NDE, very far to the right side of the scale. They're very individualized, very competitive, very isolationist. How do you think that would have affected your NDE?
I'm not sure I could speculate.
You understand, there's a question, you understand the question though I'm asking?
Yeah, if someone is very identified with physical, if you're familiar with Maslow's states of hierarchy, the first state is physical survival, egoic, me first, self-reference, and then there's a natural tendency to grow beyond that. That the reality, the fundamental reality below that, we're not growing towards anything. We're just expanding into larger aspects of ourselves. So an NDE from a person who's very concrete, I don't know that, I've had people say, well, who did you see, Jim? Who did you see? You had to see someone, and if it's someone I know, then that acknowledges my framework. So that they are living out of a fairly conceptual framework. And I don't know how they would interpret it. And I don't know, I just can't speculate.
The reason I ask this is that there are spiritual writings that talk about, at death, a letting go process, a separation process from worldly things. And if a person is not very far along that scale, then I wonder how it affects them at that time. It may be much more difficult for them, the dying process may be much more difficult for them than a person who is highly developed in the spiritual hierarchy. And they're very much live a life of presence and unity. And I wonder whether you could comment on that, having been someone who has been near that veil.
Well, again, not to believe, but to use this as a metaphorical, my wife sees auras. She sees and communicates across the boundary. And she's talked about individuals that were very identified with their bodies. And as they died, they were still identified with their bodies. So they had a very limited level of awareness that they did open to. How long they persist in that and you know, how that evolves from there, you could speculate in a lot of different ways that people have. But I think it's more of attachment than anything. There could be a developmental piece too. You know, I've talked to people who are very religious that can't get beyond the dichotomy of good and bad. You know, God is good, and He can't be bad. But God created the whole world and the universe, which has to include the bad. And it just, you know, it doesn't grok. They just, even when they try to, they can't get the conceptual abstraction.
But even setting all that aside, it seems like one thing that everyone agrees upon is that these higher levels of spirituality or higher levels of coming closer to the truth that you experienced in your NDE is a happier life.
Oh, definitely, definitely, and it's one that persists. It's a well-being, it's love, it's connection, it's unity, and at varying degrees of that wherever people end up. But I would agree, and there's that natural impulse in all of us to grow towards those states, and it's our fears, our circumstances, and our beliefs that will prevent or create resistance to that.
And from what you've talked about, it even seems that leads to healing of the body, physical healing of the body.
Yes, and the trap there is that if I get evolved enough, I'll fix my body. You get that? And we're not the body. So when they let go to, it's like in Hinduism, this is Maya, this is the illusion. It's like, if I get real enough, then I can keep my illusion. So you do the problem, and that's the trap our medical system is in. It's there to fix people, to make people different and better. And in chronic ways, I mean, I wouldn't be on the planet without the medical system. I've gone through 2 surgeries. I had a near-death experience in the second surgery as well. It's a different story. And the doctor didn't know how to fix me. You know, there wasn't anything to fix in there. The first valve had done so much damage. And I forgot where I was going with that now.
I think you were talking about the contradiction between believing that if this is going to heal us, the very pondering of that blocks it because
Yes.
we haven't let go.
Yes, yes. We exist in the present as presence. And as we let go of our identification of a certain structure, we naturally open to higher levels. So one of the diagrams that I've been playing with is that our reality is right here. It's really fixed. It's this. Okay? As people let go of their attachment to this, we naturally embrace a larger sphere of reality. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to get. It's a letting go of our attachment to this that allows the natural opening to truer states, let's say. So then these people are playing on the planet, going, well, this is an interesting life to have. I'm incontinent in bed, and, and here's these doctors that don't have a clue what they're doing. This is very fascinating. And that's as far as they go with it. It's not, you know, those bastards aren't fixing my body. It's, what else is true? What else, you know, should I be coming here or not? If you look at people who have NDEs, often they're faced with this real dilemma of, do I want to go back? Or how do I stay with this level of being? And again, our mind takes that and says, that's somewhere else. But what I would say is a better visualization for the mind is that if we crack open everything and let go of what we think life is, who we are is already here. Yeah.
That, to me, from my own experience, experience has always been the whole theme of all the near-death experiences that I've heard and my own and yours and everyone, is that it's really not so much what it is about when that happens and what's that going to be like and all that, but like what can we use from that now in our lives to help us live more fully here, and to let maybe expand into that the true reality of being that you know we often see in these experiences, that expands out beyond the normal, what we consider normal boundaries of who we are. So we allow that to continue to grow. But one of the things that this gentleman's questions, and oftentimes when I'm out and we have questions about the thinking process. When we're in this physical physiology, there's a certain process of thought that occurs, and that's how we live in this realm of being. What I discovered, the further from this body that we are expanding into the rest of creation, now we're not ever separate from it, but we begin to experience finer qualities that go beyond just the boundaries of this. Also, one thing that changes is the process of thinking. And so one of the problems with trying to describe these experiences sometimes is that you don't think the same way that you think like right here today, right now. Because there's a physiology, there's a subtle physiology of being that goes beyond just the physical processes that we have here. So
it can't be contained
very
in
different.
the
You can't hold
3D.
on to the conceptual thinking process that we use here to try to experience it, but we have to try. I mean, you know, that's why we're here.
Yeah, there's, and some people differentiate it between thinking and belief versus knowing. That people will come back emphatically and says, I know I'm not just this body. But then they try to convey what that means to people, and all we have is our concepts. So the key, really, the lesson here is to look at the relationship of us and our concepts, our beliefs. Yeah.
I don't know if this is overly simplistic, but it seems to me that what you're saying is it all boils down to the fact that we always, in every situation, have a choice. And when we choose life, that's when it opens. We always have the choice.
We always have a choice, and I would
That's what I
totally
heard
agree
you
with
say.
that. Okay, I totally agree with that. The follow-up question to that is, well, if I choose strongly enough, I can change my world.
No.
What I can do is choose my response to the world.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's a big difference, and a lot of the new thought healing modalities is still about, if you do it right, we will fix your body. Now, there's a contradiction or a paradox there, is that, and we were just talking about it at the break, is that if my body got fixed, what would I experience there that I'm seeking? And if I bring that experience into my presence, then I don't need to be any different than I am now. So it becomes a choice to say, this is what I choose to pursue. Many of the people I interviewed, it was after, and not many, all the people I interviewed, it was after made this choice. 5 minutes, I'm here. Of letting go and facing the world in entirely different ways, that physical healing actually took place. But it was a side effect. And that's why in the book that I'm writing, I said it's some people forget to die. Because they get engaged in life just as they are. Yeah.
The word begin. Answering some of what you're saying and what you're saying, my own near-death experience was, I was a vibration. I was pregnant at the time, and I received some tainted blood 40 years ago, and I also was given 6 months to live. And I was just a vibration in the light. And the peace that came over is forever yours.
Yes, yeah, can't take it away, can you?
And
Or
the
think it away.
only thing was, as I began to think prior to that, there was no thought that I had to give life to this child, that I then had a life review, and I was again in the hospital fighting to live to give her birth. And she was perfect, beautiful, untouched, totally untouched.
Beautiful. And the stories I've heard throughout here are
Yes,
amazing.
but in that.
That's one of the things that I guess I'll just finish with is
Could you
I'm
repeat a little bit of what I couldn't hear it, you're just a little bit.
her own story of
Okay.
feeling just being a vibration. So it's not an identity of self,
Right.
but an identity of something more
The
primal.
oneness that we are.
And a oneness, yeah. And again, you have to kind of scratch for
Exactly.
words that can't be totally translated.
But a peace, a
Yeah.
total peace that you have with you.
That's embodied and you'll never lose.
Yes.
Yeah. So these stories are incredibly valuable. And as we line them up, we begin to see patterns among them that we can extract and start using to help others who are wanting to change. They have to want it. That's the key. People have to take ownership and say, this is a choice I'm making. But what we can do is provide two important things. One is the possibility for attaining a quality of life higher than what we may anticipate or believe is possible, without having to fix the Russians or Chinese or whoever. The other is the process of how do we engage in life in a way that we can open to these higher circles of being. Like, try to put a language to it. I've been doing this for 20 years of interviewing people. If people want to share stories and the outcomes of the impact in their life, I'd love to hear from you. I have a book that's in editing phase right now. If you know Joan Donovan, who's the editor of Vital Signs, is taking it on, and it should be out in the fall.
What's the title?
Title at this point is Crisis to Creation. And it outlines through case histories these patterns and then brings out the essence of how do we create and examines what I call a creation cycle. That our systems, our health systems and social systems focus in on the first of three components. And totally ignore or actually deny the middle one. So it's something that I feel is my work. I can't do what I was doing. And so my life is creating itself today, piece by piece by piece. If there's people that have got resources for publishing or marketing, lecturing, that's where I'm headed. I wouldn't have believed that a decade ago. I would have denied it because it was not something I could do or wanted to do. But I'm in the middle of it now. So,